One of the more powerful ideas that has emerged internationally is that play is a human right, meaning it's something every child is born with. Given that sport is a key venue for play in our culture, our just released Project Play Platform for Action calls for sport to no longer be treated as a nice to have by leading institutions. And that adults who design policies, programs, recreation sites, and communities should be especially mindful of improving access for underrepresented populations. So where to start? Well, with a statement on the rights of children in sports tailored to the US, which in the coming months our program will create in partnership with Athletes for Hope, a nonprofit that helps pro, Olympic, and college athletes support causes that matter to them. In a few minutes, founder Ivan Blumberg will moderate a panel of athletes who share their ideas about principles that should be reflected in the document. But first, let's bring in Dionne Koller, director of the Center for Sport and the Law at the University of Baltimore, who has generously agreed to help us draft a children's rights in sports statement. So Dionne, thank you for joining us, and thank you really for all of your contributions to Project Play to date. You were on the Project Play Baltimore advisory group that helped us get that report right, and you've been such a useful resource to me and our team in understanding how policy layers over just youth development and child development, and how we can improve this space and make sport more accessible to more kids. So yeah, thank you again. So let's just start off with let's set the table here. So what is the purpose of a children's rights in sports document or statement?
Well, I think, Tom, the purpose, there are several purposes, but I think it's important in understanding the purpose of this document to understand where we are with youth sports in the United States. We don't have a sports ministry. We don't have a government agency that organizes sport in this country. We are unique in the world in that really nearly every country that participates in the Olympic movement and in international sport has a government agency and has an organizing principle around what sport is supposed to be. So we don't have that in the United States. And so youth sport is really left to the private sector, which has certainly produced some great opportunities and some terrific Olympic and elite athletes. But what's happened is millions and millions of kids, as you've documented well with the Aspen Sport and Society Project, are left on the sidelines. And so what we have is a system where there's no central organizing governing principle. There's no document, there's no discussion, there's no policy making start. And so we don't really have that here. And so when sports programs come online, it's left to sort of individual choices. And what we've seen is that those choices can produce some outcomes that aren't good for sport, that aren't good for kids, and ultimately aren't good for public health.
Yeah. And so what's interesting is in our society, I mean, children can't vote. They don't technically have a voice in the design of really anything. So how important is it and can this resource be useful in bringing the voice of children into the design of experiences that might meet their needs?
Yeah, I think a document like this is critical because one of the other things the data show, and again, you've done a really good job documenting this, is that we have a couple problems in youth sports in the United States. We have a crisis of exclusion, which is not enough kids are getting into the game because they don't have access to it. And we have a crisis of retention. We have a crisis of burnout. So we have too many kids who they do have access and they do participate and they walk away. And they walk away at that critical age 13 where they say, I'm burned out, this isn't fun, and I don't want to do this anymore. And again, for the national sort of goals and what we want for elite sport, as well as what we would want for public health, those aren't great outcomes. And so putting kids' voices into the design of sport programs is something we really haven't focused on, but by doing so, we can drill down and get to the design of programs that include and retain more kids.
Mm-hmm. How could such a statement or document be used by various stakeholders, policy leaders. Could NGBs use it? National governing bodies? Could local sport organizations, government, grant makers? I mean, help me think through the application and who would use it.
I think all of the above, Tom. I think one of the things that we've seen in sports is that there is such a great need for education. We have a lot of terrific people that, for instance, coach youth sports, that volunteer to be a part of youth sports. But I think one of the lessons from the USA Gymnastics, for instance, abuse scandal and different congressional investigations into our sports programs is that we also know that we have a lot of people involved in sports who simply don't understand how programs should be structured, what the goals should be. And so a document like this can be used for those who are working in sports to better orient them as sort of a North Star. How should we design these programs? But we've also seen too often, and I think congressional hearings this summer really underscored this, that too often our policymakers don't understand what the needs are in sports. And so this can educate them as well. So I think all throughout the landscape of youth sports, I think this document can be incredibly helpful to educate every type of stakeholder so that everybody's on the same page about what the goals should be, about what's developmentally appropriate, and what's going to get us to where we want to be in United States youth sport.
Where else have we seen such a document be useful in being a foundational piece in building an effective sports system?
Well, I think Norway has been the shining example of this. And I think, you can't argue with outcomes. And Norway is on the top of the medal stands. For a country as small as they are, they produce elite athletes at just an astonishing rate. They also produce happy athletes and widespread participation. And so Norway adopted a children's rights in sports document. It was adopted throughout the country at all levels. There is alignment with their Olympic program. It sort of deliberately works with that program. And so it's been a really important guiding, organizing feature of sports in Norway. And I think it's a blueprint really for any country who wants to rethink how they're doing youth sports.
Mm-hmm. So, I've been there, I've been to Norway, you kick the tires on this idea as well. To anyone who would say that, well, that's Norway. It's a tiny country in Europe and maybe more homogenous than we are. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but whatever. Norway is different than we are. What would you say to that?
Well, I think, of course, there are differences between Norway and the United States, but I think what we know through the Olympic movement is that sport is universal. And what we need is participation. We need kids to stick with it. And so the lessons from sports and the barriers to sports and the issues that come up in sports, those truly are universal. That's not anything unique to Norway or the United States. And so I think we can take Norway's lesson, their blueprint, their document as very, very informative, because it really doesn't matter where you're a kid playing sports. We know throughout the world, you want to have fun, you want to develop skills. And from a nationwide perspective, you ultimately want your youth sports program to both help or support public health, but also result in great outcomes for elite sports. So I think it doesn't matter that this document is a Norwegian document. It could be from anywhere. I think the lessons are truly universal.
When we talk about a right, are there legal implications? Does it mean that we're now setting up a scenario where, I don't know, the 11-year-old is able to sue the local Little League because, he or she got stuck on the bench for 4 innings? I mean, what does that mean exactly, a right?
Yeah, I think sometimes the word right, this is where there is a very different perspective in the United States and Norway, and I think it's really worth clearing up. Rights can be used in many different ways, and certainly there are legal rights. You can give people rights to sue and rights to go to court and seek redress. That's not what the point of this document would be. There are lots of different rights or conceptions of rights. There are moral rights, there are normative rights. The idea of a right that I think is instructive for this document is creating norms, is creating best practices around sports. And it's also the idea when we speak speak of rights, and this is outside the concept of legal rights, but when we speak of rights, we're really speaking about individuals and looking at individual experiences and looking at individual autonomy. And so I think rights from that perspective is crucially important as we talk about youth sports, because we really haven't done that enough. So no, Tom, this isn't going to be a document that gives anybody a right to sue because their coach kept him on the bench.
Exactly. It's just basically saying, look, take this seriously. The kids deserve it. Right. I hear you. So what would be the key features? I know we haven't built this thing yet, and we still need to figure it out, but what are some of the key features that could be in such a document?
So I would see it as having three core values that would sort of underpin the entire project. And I think those values would be inclusiveness, responsiveness, and clarity. And I think the document needs to be inclusive in the sense that it would be looking to establish rights or establish these principles or norms that include and provide for participation for all kids. And we know we don't have that in the United States, and we know we'd be so much better off if we did. So I think inclusiveness is number one. I think the second thing for this document is responsiveness. And by this, I mean, we need to really pay attention to what kids are telling us about sports, because they tell us a whole lot and they vote with their feet. And we haven't taken that into account thus far. So this document would be responsive in the sense that it would listen to kids, it would respond to kids, and it would build programs that are safe, healthy, developmentally appropriate, but also take into account that it's kids' bodies and lives that are doing sports. And so I think that's crucially important as well. And then the third thing is clarity, Tom, and this is what we started out talking about. We don't have a lot of clarity in the United States around what should youth sports programs be about? What values should they serve? What benchmarks should they have? What are the best practices? It stuns me whenever I give a talk about youth sports, I have parents talk to me and say, wait, can they do that? Is that true? That's not the law. Nobody's taking care of that. No government agencies paying attention? And the answer is no. And so I think we need a lot of clarity around these programs, and that can just bring an enormous, helpful, sort of unifying principle to what we're trying to do.
Terrific. Well, Dionne, look forward to digging into this project with you and with Athletes for Hope. And with that, I'd like to bring in Ivan Blumberg, the founder of Athletes for Hope, who will lead a conversation with us.
Welcome, everyone. My name is Ivan Blumberg. I'm the CEO of Athletes for Hope. Athletes for Hope is an organization founded by some amazing folks: Muhammad Ali, Andre Agassi, Mia Hamm, Warwick Dunn, Jackie Joyner-Kersee. We are over 7,000 athletes in 25 different sports. And on behalf of all of those athletes, we're really honored to be able to partner with Project Play on what I think is a really important conversation. I want to compliment Tom and his entire team for the important and really timely work that they're doing. We took a look at our entire athlete base, and we asked our team which athletes were passionate about youth sports in this particular space, and really three athletes bubbled up. And so we're thrilled to have you guys with us. I'm going to take a minute and introduce each of you, and then we're just going to dive into a conversation. Our first Athletes for Hope member is Lacey Henderson. Lacey is a Paralympic track and field athlete. She is a 6-time U.S. national champion in the long jump. She's the world record holder in the pole vault, the American record holder in the long jump. She's a Paralympic athlete from 2016, a silver medalist at the 2019 Pan Am Games. And while she did plan on going to Tokyo in 2020, she is currently training for the 2021 Paralympic Games in Tokyo. So our second athlete is Kayla Alexander. Kayla is a fantastic WNBA player with the Minnesota Lynx. Interestingly, Kayla grew up in Canada. She is Canadian. And so we'll have an opportunity at some point later on to maybe do a little contrasting between youth sports in Canada and the United States. She is an Orangeman. She went to Syracuse University as an undergrad, was drafted 8th by the San Antonio Stars into the WNBA. And interestingly, she's not just an incredible athlete, she's actually an author. She's published her first book. It's called The Magic of Basketball. She wrote it and published it with her sister. And it sort of draws some intersecting lines between the benefits of sports, basketball, and youth sports, which made it appropriate. Our third athlete is Eric Kendricks. Eric is a linebacker with the Minnesota Vikings. While he was at UCLA, he won the Butkus Award as the top linebacker in college football, where he was also an All-American. He's led the Vikings in tackles 5 years in a row, and last year was named to his first Pro Bowl and his first team All-Pro honors. He is as active off the field as he is on it, and we see this at Athletes for Hope firsthand all the time. Without further ado, let's jump in. I think you guys heard the purpose of the panel in the earlier discussion. How do you guys feel as professional athletes about creating a document that really declares that every child has this right to play sports, and sort of describing the type of experience that those children are entitled to?
I have been, I've been lucky enough, I think, growing up in my life, that I've been put in sports like through private institutions, and just having even the privilege of my own disability to be able enough to join traditional sports. And now that I have spent almost 10 years now doing Paralympic sport and seeing international sport and international governing bodies, the way that they treat their sport programs much differently than how we do here, especially when it comes to youth development of sport, development of Olympic and Paralympic sport. It is exciting to see more movements being made towards youth that don't have the same opportunities that I think I had growing up. I was lucky enough to be a collegiate athlete and then do Paralympics, but especially in the disability world, there are not a lot of athletes that get the opportunity to participate, especially at higher collegiate levels, unless you can score points in the system. And I think our country we've gotten very comfortable feeding NCAA athletes into more elite sport programs. And when it comes to many of the different facets of disability, that has proven to not be strong development for our teams.
Fantastic, thank you. So Eric, when you think about your own youth sports experience, talk to us a little bit about that. And did it serve your needs? If you look back on it today as, an All-Pro in the NFL, if you could change some things about your own youth experience, what would those be? How would you, if you could wave a magic wand and improve it, what would that look like?
First of all, like, sports to me was everything. It provided me structure. It provided me something to go to after school and participate in, as well as that social aspect as well. Learning how to be on a team, dealing with people from all different types of backgrounds and religions and things like that. But the thing that sticks out to me the most, especially playing football, is just the safety aspect of it. I know hearing about the youth football leagues now, they have a bigger emphasis on the safety of, tackling and things like that. But when I was a kid, it was like kind of like go out and hit each other. You know what I mean? Go out and use your helmet to hit somebody. So just cleaning up that part of it, I feel like that part of the sport could discourage people, especially at a young age.
Yeah, it's interesting because it's been a bit of a top-down approach. It feels like the NFL has taken on a bit of a leadership role in cleaning up the safety at its level, and now it feels like that's beginning to trickle down. And interestingly, when we get to it at the end, sort of some of the things that we may want to include in sort of a Bill of Rights, I think, health and safety concerns needs to be on that list, right? How do we
Definitely.
make kids, at 10, 11, 12 years old that are blocking and tackling can be in a position where they can actually play when they're 16, 17, 18 years old, right?
One thing that sticks to my mind when you say that is just, just like simple hydration knowledge. You know what I mean? When I was a kid, between practices or double days or whatever we had, the hydration practice was not there. And now that I've grown up throughout athletics and in college and stuff like that, there's much bigger emphasis on hydration just for your muscles and your recovery aspects. So just something that simple, could be, implemented.
For sure. So Kayla, how are you?
Doing well.
Glad. So talk to us a little bit about your youth sports experience. Sort of similarly, did it serve you well? Did it check the boxes that you needed it to check? You grew up in Canada, but you now play professional basketball in the United States and have written about it. How has that experienced your working knowledge of youth sports, and how, if you don't mind, might the two countries compare and contrast?
Okay. So growing up, I was pretty fortunate. I grew up in a middle-class family, and my parents were really big advocates on just having active lifestyles. So they put us in a number of different sports growing up because they didn't want us to just be buckled down to one thing. They were very big on trying new things, which I really appreciated because throughout all my different experiences, whether it was through swimming, playing volleyball, basketball, not only did I learn different skill sets, but I also learned how to create and foster like positive relationships with other girls my age. So I developed like social skills. I also felt like I was in a safe environment with different coaches that I had growing up too as well. Like they always create environments where it wasn't bullying. It's very inclusive. And then also through sports, I love that you just learn different things as well as nutrition, taking care of your body and so forth. So it's big picture, not just about the athlete, but a holistic approach. And then with respect to my playing experiences in the States compared to Canada, I will say that in Canada, I was fortunate. I had made opportunities, but I noticed that even when I played in the States and playing professionally and even overseas, you notice that in different countries, like they have like, I guess, like a set of rules or a bill of rights of how much training they want their kids to participate in or their athletes, safety protocols and different things like that. And we don't necessarily have that, not here in the US and especially not back home in Canada. And I know that's something that they're working towards creating. So it's kind of interesting to see how it varies from country to country, depending on where you play professionally.
How important for you guys do you think it is that kids have this opportunity to experience different sports before they sort of pick one?
Can I start? I think it's really important. I honestly, this is just my biased opinion, but I don't think you should be focusing on one sport before the age of 12 or 13. I feel like when you're a young kid, you're still developing, you need to learn different movements, your muscles need to develop and grow. You need to learn how to just learn from different environments and different skill sets. And I feel like when you specialize so early at such a young age, not only are you like putting wear and tear on your body, you're putting yourself at risk for certain injuries. On top of that, you're also putting yourself at risk at burnout. And I feel like when you're a young kid, you should not be experiencing any form of burnout. Sports should just be a place to go have fun, to be active, to make friends. It should be a nurturing and a positive environment. It shouldn't be a stressful, oh my goodness, like I'm tired, I'm burnt out, this isn't fun anymore. Not when you're young kids.
Yeah, I watch kids sports now, and it feels like it's all the things that you just described as not wanting to be. Stressful, burned out, right? Eric, Lacey, your thoughts on sort of the importance of kids having sort of a multi-sport experience growing up?
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of people are surprised when they find out. Actually, I started track and field after I graduated from college. I was a competitive cheerleader growing up. And before that, played volleyball, played soccer, did all the things. I come from an athletic background. My dad went to the 1968 Olympic trials. So like sport was always in our life. And there's like a weird old school mentality when you are like a gentleman of a certain age that did sports, where like sport, like it will always be in your life. But the holisticness of it, I think had to we grew up with that, which was something that was a little bit more healthy for sure, mentally as well as physically. But I think now you see coming from seeing kids like that are in private school situations, or seeing kids that want to become elite athletes, even in the disability spectrum, you have to get specific equipment for any type of activity you do. And oftentimes that's driven by the parents, but you can't just compete in your school if there's no adaptive program for you. You have to do specialized clubs, you have to do this, you have to do that. And that's a lot of pressure to put on a child. And being a kid should be literally the best. You have no bills, you have no real worries in your life. Like, this should be the time where everything is fun and you just can discover what your talents are, and you find the things that build that passion that will eventually drive you towards something.
Eric, thoughts?
Yeah, I grew up. I played as much as I could, and I ran track. I played volleyball in middle school. I played baseball in high school. I played basketball, and I truly believe that the skills that I received for football was attributed to the other sports I played as well. And I for sure playing defense on basketball is for sure going to help me on the football field. And just like I said, the overall aspect of just going from one team to another, everything, it's like it works differently. When I go from the football field to the basketball field, like the team camaraderie, just how the structure of things, everything works differently. It forces me to adjust. It forces me to kind of, not get burnt out. I feel like it's a fresh start again, and it's just like a new awakening. It was always fun for me to switch sports.
So I'd like to move on to a slightly different but critically important topic. I think we are all spending a lot of time, rightfully so. We should have been spending it for many, many years, talking about leveling the playing field in society. And it feels to me that sports, and particularly youth sports, is an ideal place to start that. That sports can take on a leadership role in leveling that playing field, not just in sport, but outside of it as well. And I just wanted to sort of get a reaction from each of you. Why, if you believe that, why is sports sort of uniquely positioned to take a stand around leveling playing fields? And I know it's important to all of you. Eric, I want to start with you because of your role with the Vikings.
I need more wording on your question, like leveling the playing field in which way? Like, you have, obviously there's like the financial leveling where, sometimes people, like it took, for me, in order to play football at a young age, it took a village. I had to get cleats from, my mom, my older brother had paid for my admission to play. It was like, that's kind of how it was. But there's also the leveling this playing field where it's like, I could be, where I grew up, if I play with someone whose kid was, his dad was a doctor, we're now on the same level as far as we're both on the same team. We're both working side by side, even though our economic situation may be different. So, there's definitely different types of that on each. So I don't know if you want me to be more specific on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think where I'm headed a little bit is sort of the importance of removing that financial barrier, right? To creating access to sports through coaching and making it not based on social economic status, so that kids from different neighborhoods have different access to better coaching, better equipment, better field conditions, et cetera, et cetera. And it feels to me at some level, and you guys should all weigh in, that we can use sports as an example. If we can create some equity in the sports space, it sets an example for other aspects of society.
Yeah, just continue on my conversation. Sorry, but a conversation that often comes up is like, how come people in American international soccer is like, as far as men's, is not as competitive? That's what I hear all the time. But one of the things I remember from a kid was, my mom paying for my brother's soccer, his club soccer at the time, which, in order to be in a good soccer league as a kid, you have to be in the club. So it's going to cost more. And I remember specifically my mom's kind of stressing about the cost of that for my older brother to play. I didn't play in the club because, there was no way there could be both of us, doing that. But I attended the practices with him. I even played in the practices and stuff like that. But yeah, as far as playing, I had to have the jerseys. I had to be, had to pay for the admission. So just that alone, I feel like can discourage tons of kids from that would maybe playing football or other sports that may be cheaper, from just joining the soccer. They could excel in soccer. That could be their sport. But if the club team is too expensive, that's in their area, that's very competitive and it's going to get them to the next level, then they're not going to ever get to that level.
Lacey, thoughts about this particular topic?
Yeah, absolutely. I think Eric hit the nail on the head for a lot of things. And I was lucky enough, actually, I'm pretty sure I know Eric, so we went to this gym in Phoenix. I was lucky enough. I was like, oh, I know him. I was lucky enough to have the experience where I joined a training group in Phoenix, and it was a mixture of able-bodied and disabled athletes. When I first, long story longer, when I first applied, they were like, no, you can't come. And I just, because of who I am, I'm like, by no, do you mean? But later. So it was eventually yes. And we got to learn firsthand, the beautiful thing about Paralympic track and field, especially, and able-bodied track and field, is that it's the same event, it's the same distances, they're all the same events, there's nothing different. The training is the same. The equipment may be a little different. That's the only thing that's different. So you learn deeper and more intricacies about your event when you run into a lot of people going for the same goal that have different issues. You develop as an athlete as you see other people's issues, you ultimately grow and perform better together. There are not a lot of inclusive multi-ability programs like that, especially in this country. And it changed me fundamentally as a person. I think it changed a lot of my training partners fundamentally as a person, as people as well. But one of my biggest fears of the Paralympic movement, slowly but surely growing, is that it will become less of the differently abled Olympics and more of the privileged Olympics, because a lot of people like speaking about how cool the prosthetics are, how cool the equipment is. People are eventually going to be superseding the non-disabled athletes, but all of that comes at a cost. These prosthetics are insanely expensive, and when you're a child developing in sport, you need a new prosthetic leg at least once a year, especially if you're an active kid. You're banging those things around, those things are blowing up left and right. And we don't have good access to often pediatric prosthetic care, but also pediatric prosthetic sport specific care. And so we need to create better strategies, I think, not just for children, but also for adults, because you can acquire a disability at any one point in your life. To be able to have those resources to try and see what sport works for them, because there's going to be a lot of hidden talent that never gets an opportunity because they don't have access to the equipment to even try. For a long time, it was access to even knowing about disabled sport. It's still very low on the marketing aspect, I feel like, in sport in this country. That's slowly but surely changing, but it's just, there's a lot of really strong, more further developed countries that are coming up that are top performers in Paralympics, mostly because of the access to equipment and quality equipment. And to me, that is not the spirit of sport.
I want to thank the three of you, as always, on behalf of Athletes for Hope. We're thrilled to have you and honored to have you as members of the organization. And we're also quite honored to be part of the Project Play Summit. And I'm going to turn it back over to Tom, and he's going to talk to us a little bit about next steps that we take from here. So thanks, everybody.